In fall 1863, China decided to stab Britain, seeing an opportunity to make significant gains and observing clear tension between Great Britain and Japan. Unfortunately for Britain, this occurred just as he was hoping to be able to rely on China against Japan. As orders process, we see that in North America, Britain is still killing off the remnants of Russia in Alaska and Canada. CSA has taken New York City and is successfully, albeit slowly, expanding into Mexico. In South America, Mexico abandons Bogotá to take Lima from Brazil. This doesn't actually get Mexico any gains from that continent, but it does weaken Brazil and strengthen Holland, who occupies Bogotá. French dominance in West Africa becomes basically complete this season, while Turkey is now so far south that a confrontation with Holland is inevitable. Britain has moved to the southern coast of Africa, so it's clear that together, Britain and Turkey will probably overwhelm the Dutch in that region. In the east, Britain takes the initiative in the island wars with Holland, but at the same time, France captures Australian territory, and Britain is losing significant ground on the continent to China, including parts of India and Hong Kong. China also continues to expand into Russia, although the dominant power in Chinese seas is clearly Japan. As China noted in reflecting on this season, he made 5 gains in a season including Hong Kong, weakening Great Britain and giving himself the ability to gradually achieve total land supremacy in Asia. And while Japan was outwardly neutral, they assured China that they were on the same side. Closer to Europe, Russia loses ground to Turkey and is basically just floundering, struggling to survive against invasions from all sides at this point. In Europe, the continued trend against France in that region is reflected in the fall of Marseille into Prussian hands. As Holland viewed this period in retrospect, he was surprised that France chose to side with him, because it led to them going down together. Holland's plan became to hold in the Americas and hope CSA would keep him alive on 3 dots. He doubted his ability to hold on in Asia. Holland kicked himself for trusting the British, and predicted that the game would fall to China, the Ottomans, and CSA. In spring 1864, in North America, the CSA combined continuing advances into Mexico with the initial stages of an invasion of Canada, against which Britain was ill-positioned to defend. Britain felt he had to continue bargaining with CSA at this point rather than fighting, because he wasn't strong enough to do anything against him in the region, and he just hoped CSA would not try to go for Europe. Mexico makes what can only be described as inexplicable defensive decisions that lead to disaster and seem to certify that the end is nigh for that power. To the south, very little seems changed this season. The great powers of Europe and Brazil continue to be locked in what I consider to be a pointless struggle, considering that France in particular is in a life-and-death struggle in Europe proper, in which its fleets could be put to much better use. In Africa, the French-Dutch coalition clashes against the British-Turkish alliance, with the latter taking the initiative and therefore the edge, despite the fact that the former have obtained more centers in that region and should really be able to deploy more units onto that front. In the east, the fights from last year continued, with Britain losing ground to China and India again, and China having to reposition elsewhere for further advancement into Russia. In Europe, another French home centre was occupied, by the British this time. In fall 1864, Britain released a player skill ranking, CSA at the top, followed by China, France, Turkey, Japan, Holland, Brazil, Prussia, Austria, Russia, Mexico, and the dead USA at the bottom. In North America, CSA advanced further into Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean, frankly without experiencing much meaningful opposition. Britain stopped proceeding further against Russia in North America, seemingly to bring those units down to fight CSA. But this year, it didn't do anything. In South America, Brazil finally made some progress against Holland. France took a Dutch centre too. Although Holland took a Mexican centre at the same time, it was a definite loss for Holland in the region. In Africa, Holland lost ground to Turkey and Britain. While France didn't lose any ground there, the French position didn't improve either. In Asia, centres changed hands between Britain and Holland without the balance of power between them in the region really changing. Britain lost a centre to China and gained one from Russia and Asia as well. China gained more ground from Russia too, reaching a massive and frightening size. France walked into an unguarded Japanese centre. Following the fall, Britain gave more detailed reflections on each player. He found CSA intolerable to talk to and deal with, but annoyingly skilled and particularly experienced at this map. He resolved to fight him properly this time. Britain said that by far his greatest mistake this game had been putting too much trust in CSA. Even as he resolved to fight, though, he wasn't sure how much he could do against the Confederate States. Britain found France very annoying to talk to and deal with as well, and not as tactically adept as he'd previously thought. He expected Holland to be reduced to rubble soon, especially with France and Mexico fighting him. He found Prussia to be a good ally, although annoyingly tactically inept, a possibly target for when Britain needed future growth, though only after the French threat was neutralized and Russia finished being invaded. He thought Austria was another decent, albeit tactically inept, ally. He was surprised Austria had not attacked Turkey, as most of his units were doing nothing. He perceived Turkey as very loyal and tactically skilled, something he liked a lot. Britain noted that the Turk was growing fast, but he doubted Turkey would attack him anytime soon. He decided to try to use him to attack France and Holland in Africa, as well as try to play him and China off against each other. Britain was very wary of France, who he thought was a strong player that might side with Japan instead of himself. He found Japan a good and trustworthy ally, though supply center greedy and not paying enough attention to the game. Britain's assessment of Mexico was dreadful, especially since Mexico at this point was throwing the game to CSA. Brazil was not bad, but not communicative enough. For Russia, Britain said simply, "Need I say anything?" Which I suppose says it all. Spring 1865 played out. In North America, CSA continued invading both Canada and Mexico, while also supporting Mexico in an attack on Britain. Britain went after the last couple of Russian dots on the continent. In South America, France and Mexico continued fighting Holland. In Africa, a season of repositioning took place. In Asia, China kept on crushing Russia, and Britain finally succeeded in pushing into Russia through Scandinavia. China noted that his move into Caspian Sea here was a maneuver that CSA encouraged from the early game. The CSA player was involved with designing the map, and had pushed for that to be passable. Though China was initially worried that the Caspian Sea would be a white elephant, and he notes that was ultimately that unit's destiny, the value of it while that area was in play was huge, devastating in fact, and China credits it with single-handedly tipping the war against Turkey dramatically in his favor. In Europe, the slow invasion of the French homeland continued. In fall 1865, CSA continued absorbing Mexico while waging war with Britain. Britain turned to fight CSA, but CSA was already reaching tendrils across the sea toward the British Isles. In South America, Holland lost his last bit of land on the continent to Mexico, while Mexico lost ground to Brazil. In Africa, the same wars raged back and forth as had been going on for some time, inconclusively. In Asia, France lost his last foothold on the continent to China. Britain retook control of the bit of Australia that had fallen to France. Japan went after French island possessions. China continued worming his way further west across the continent, having established dominance over most of Russia and parts of India, as well as everything else touching China by land besides the Korean peninsula, which Japan still had held on to. China, in reflecting on this season, identified this as where there was a failed attempt on his part to stab Japan, which he negotiated with Britain. Believing he knew Japan's orders, China thought he achieved good gains, but Japan apparently changed them at the very last second, and Great Britain, who was supposed to bounce him out of Hawaii, simply chose not to, causing the Chinese plan to fail. Great Britain had several times in the game pitched a "why don't you stab Japan while I pretend to be his friend for a year before joining you" idea to China, which he says never interests him. China identified his apparent accidental failure to bounce Japan as a sign that Britain was trying to avoid showing his hand here. China apologized for the stab and resolved to distrust Britain going forward, but he noted that the stab attempt, in hindsight, made Japan doubt him for the rest of the game. In Europe, France was driven into the Iberian Peninsula, losing all of what's actually considered part of France. In spring 1866, Mexico and Great Britain seemed to work together in North America against CSA, but they were much too little, and it was a season of CSA repositioning to more effectively crush them. In South America, Brazil pushed Mexico off of the continent completely, while continuing to fight the French in the seemingly never-ending conflict that France was now slowly losing due to bleeding centers all over the map. In Africa, France lost ground to Turkey in the north, but moved to involve himself in the south, essentially for the first time in the game. In Asia, Britain lost more ground to China. Holland lost one of his few remaining centers in the region to Japan. In Europe, Prussia turned on Britain and Austria, taking Sweden and getting into Marseille with French support. In fall 1866, Great Britain and CSA crushed Mexico between them, leaving Mexico hanging on by a thread in Central America. In South America, Mexico regained a foothold in Bogotá alongside a renewed French offensive against Brazil that captured 2 other Brazilian centers. In Africa, Britain advanced against Holland's tiny surviving corner of the map. France moved away from that front without having really impacted the fight. In Asia, Japan captured more French island centers, while China captured more of India from Britain as had been happening every season for some time. In Europe, CSA captured Greenland. The war raged on throughout the continent. without much progress on either side. In spring 1867, CSA continued the quest to dominate the North American continent, repositioning to ease the ongoing attack on British territory in the region. To the south, CSA captured Panama while Brazil captured Bogotá, though Brazil lost Lima to France at the same time. France generally seemed to have the momentum in the Brazilian-French War at this time. In South America, France continued to advance against Brazil while Brazil seized Bogotá from Mexico. In Africa, despite Britain and Turkey outnumbering the remaining Dutch units in southern Africa, nothing happened due to the fact that Holland's remaining centres were inland, and the two British units nearby were fleets and could not provide support to the Turkish units to attack. In Asia, China continued to advance against Britain in India and at sea, while Britain and Japan continued killing off the near-dead Holland. In fall 1867, CSA continued his tireless quest to drive Britain completely off of the North American continent, while gaining additional ground in the Caribbean and a foothold in South America, capturing the most flipped centre of this game, Bogotá. Brazil failed to regain any ground against France in the south, suggesting the tide there was really turning against them. Brazil noted that the seizure of Bogotá by CSA was something CSA claimed he had agreed to when he had not. Brazil says he had become CSA's vassal at this point. He was no longer very invested in the game, and he would just be filling in the orders CSA suggested and trusting in his skills. In Africa, Holland continued to defend successfully in the south and snuck up into an undefended French centre in the west. Further east, Holland also snuck into British-controlled Oman. In Asia, China continued to advance against Britain and took a Turkish centre as well, but lost an island centre to Japan at the same time. Britain took a centre from Japan despite the fact that they had been working together not long ago and had a clear common enemy in China. In Europe, Austria took Iberia away from France, leaving France with only Gibraltar left on continental Europe. CSA inched closer to conquering Europe itself by taking Dublin from Britain. In spring 1868, CSA and Britain negotiated, CSA offering to give back Dublin if Britain didn't contest their capture of more British centres in North America. At this point, Britain had learned that CSA was just talking trash, and that nothing he offered from here on was likely to mean anything, and he was almost begging China to come and help him fight CSA. As orders processed, CSA took Oregon and helped Brazil take back some territory from France. In Africa, Holland and France switched dots, while CSA took a Dutch island. In Asia, Japan and Britain continued to fight, mostly to Britain's disadvantage. China continued to penetrate further south and west against Britain and Turkey. China also worked with Russia, now, to support additional attacks on Turkey, though those were unsuccessful. In Europe, Austria took a Turkish centre in Eastern Europe, marking the beginning of the status quo there beginning to change. Britain took Denmark from Prussia, but failed to retake Dublin from CSA. Fall 1868 proceeded with CSA continuing to slowly crush Britain in North America, while penetrating deeper into South America, working with Brazil against France. Although Brazil was, theoretically, his partner in the south, CSA received the primary benefits of the fighting. In Africa, France gained a tiny bit of ground relative to Turkey, but only because Turkey was moving units toward other fronts and away from the less important African front. In Asia, China continued to advance against both Britain and Turkey, while successfully supporting Russia in retaking a centre from Turkey. In Europe, Austria seized another Eastern European centre from Turkey, and Turkey seized Sicily from Austria at the same time. Prussia took Bavaria from Austria as well. After the season processed, Britain made an entertaining visual representation of how each player skill rated versus how pleasant or unpleasant they were. You can see the chart on screen now. You will note that most of the players were perceived as bad at the game but nice, while CSA and China were unpleasant people who were good at the game. Turkey was both good at the game and nice, and USA and France were both considered as somewhat unpleasant and bad at the game, with USA being worse at the game and France being more unpleasant. Although CSA was clearly both the most unpleasant and the best, according to the clear British chart. In spring 1869, in the Americas, Britain remained besieged in the north, and France lost a centre to Brazil in the south. In Africa, Turkey pulled a unit back from the front with Holland. In Asia, China took another couple of British and Turkish centres, reducing the British presence in India to a single centre. In Europe, CSA took Edinburgh, and Prussia took Valencia back from Austria. In fall 1869 in the Americas, CSA invaded deeper into Canada and began strengthening his foothold in South America, completely removing France from the latter continent. In Africa, France disengaged from Turkey in order to devote more units to defending the West African coast from CSA. Turkey continued to disengage from the fight with Holland in the south to pull further back north. In Asia, Britain held off attempts to advance by China, but lost a centre to Japan. China took another Turkish centre and clearly positioned to stab into Russia. In Europe, Turkey and Austria traded Italian centres, Prussia took Gibraltar, and CSA took over the entire island of Great Britain. In spring 1870 in the Americas, CSA reduced Britain's hold over North America to Anchorage, and CSA seemed to position to go after Brazil and South America. Which, if you've been looking at his pattern of behavior so far, not really a surprise. In Africa, France and Holland began fighting each other directly for the first time in a while, with France destroying one Dutch unit and bouncing the attack coming from the other. Turkey continued pulling out of Africa, as did Britain. In Asia, Japan took another British centre, British retook a Middle Eastern centre from Holland, and China's advance was finally paused by Russia destroying the Chinese unit that had moved into position for the stab into Russia. In Europe, Prussia took Piedmont and Venice from Austria, who I think am a martyr. In fall 1870, CSA finally completely conquered North America and began transparently conquering Brazil as well. In Africa, France convoyed into Cape Town to take that from Britain. In Asia, China pushed Britain out of India completely and took a centre from Russia despite Russia's earlier counterattack. China also took Sakhalin from Japan. However, at the same time, China had to move additional units toward Russia's northeast corner to defend against a possible attack from CSA. In Europe, CSA made landfall in mainland Europe by putting an army in Norway and a fleet in Denmark. Turkey took Corsica and an Eastern European centre from Austria. In spring 1871, in the Americas, not much happened, but CSA somehow got Brazil to move a unit or two away from their shared border. In Africa, Holland snuck into a French centre at the same time that France walked into a British centre. In Asia, Britain continued to grapple with China and Japan, retaking Ceylon from China. In Europe, Prussia took Budapest from Austria, and Britain retook Denmark from CSA. In fall 1871 in the Americas, almost literally nothing happened on land. No centres changed hands. In Africa, France retook the centre Holland had tried to sneak control of in the west, while Turkey pushed through a gap in the French defences to the north. A certain stability seemed to settle over Asia. In Europe, Austria lost their last centre to Turkey. In spring 1872, CSA finally snapped his jaws shut on Brazil and South America, snagging 3 Brazilian centres at once. In Africa, Turkey took more ground relative to France, while France moved more force south, seemingly to go after Holland and Britain. In Asia, very little happened, with Chinese expansion stalled out, and in Europe, CSA pushed more units forward around the continent. In fall 1872, Brazil diminished further at Confederate hands, leaving Brazil with only Rio de Janeiro and the southern cone. In Africa, France took one of the 2 Dutch centres left on the continent, and CSA helped France defend itself against Turkey in North Africa. In Asia, Chinese fleets began moving out from the coasts. Japan took one of Britain's Australian centres. In Europe, CSA made landfall in Holland and put an army in Finland. In spring 1873, Rio de Janeiro fell into Confederate hands. In Africa, CSA got a single army on the ground there in the midst of French territory, though it was not occupying a centre. To the south, Britain retook Cape Town from France. Elsewhere, it was a season of repositioning. In fall 1873, Brazil was reduced to Uruguay. In Africa, Britain and France traded centres. In Europe, CSA took over Iberia. In spring 1874, CSA positioned to finish Brazil off. In Africa, Britain and France again traded centres. In Europe, CSA took the remaining British centres in the region. In fall 1874, CSA defeated Brazil completely. In Africa, CSA took Morocco from France, while France finished off Holland. In Asia, China and Japan continued the very inconclusive conflict they'd been engaged in off and on for almost the whole game. At the same time, CSA took a centre in Australia. In Europe, CSA vacated Sweden, allowing Britain to keep it, but simultaneously occupied Paris. The only notable event of spring 1875 was France walking into Confederate-controlled Valencia. In fall 1875, in Asia, China continued trying to conquer Japanese centres, while Japan lost more ground to CSA in Australia. In Europe, CSA conquered the French homeland and took St. Petersburg. In spring 1876, CSA took the Falklands from Britain, capturing the last British holding in the Americas. Confederate fleets began to circle the coasts of Africa. France and CSA attacked the Turkish and British holdings in Africa from 2 different angles. In Europe, CSA got Kiel. In fall 1876, the units on both sides of the Great Struggle were basically deadlocked. In spring 1877, China pushed into Russia, perhaps the better to support it against CSA. CSA and France focused their offensive into Africa. In fall 1877, CSA spread French dominance over Africa. CSA took New Zealand and Berlin as well, while supporting Moscow against China. In spring 1878, the Confederate mask came off, and CSA finally stabbed France to go for the solo. CSA began to take African centers from France as well as Turkey and Britain. CSA also moved to retake Iberia and Gibraltar. In the east, CSA took Fiji. In fall 1878, CSA simultaneously took Prussia, Warsaw, and Bavaria, and positioned for further African invasion. In spring 1879, CSA moved more forcefully on Africa, took Silesia and Piedmont in Europe, and penetrated into the south of Italy. In fall 1879, CSA took over most of Africa and most of Europe, including Moscow, winning the game. This is what the final map looked like. The Confederacy, by taking over all of the Americas, most of Europe and Africa, half of Australia, and even a tiny chunk of Asia, had functionally conquered the world. It was like some alternate history gone terribly wrong. Like some supervillain had traveled back in time to give the Confederacy jet planes, aircraft carriers, and nuclear weapons. Slowly but surely, one of the map's initially smallest powers, destined seemingly to be crushed by the USA or the Great British Empire, had instead utterly extinguished most of its rivals and taken over the world. Reviewing the game, Britain identified his primary mistakes, in retrospect, as being indecisive, trusting CSA, overextending himself, and being slightly too greedy for supply centers he couldn't hold. He made a final chart outlining his opinions of each player, and he explained his thoughts on each person in writing. CSA was good at diplomacy and tactics, but a deliberately provocative and rather nasty player, who often contrasted that with flattery for maximum effect. His tactics mainly involved small stabs, where he would take a few supply centers or violate DMZs, and then justify it and convince you not to attack him, before going all in on the stab. A bit like Hitler with Czechoslovakia in 1938. Incredibly manipulative, and had his fingers in everyone's pie. China was likewise good at diplomacy and tactics, rather arrogant but more civil than CSA in a very British way. Strangely frank and honest, which Britain appreciated. A bit too stubborn, though, difficult to change his mind. Japan was good at diplomacy and a very amicable player, less good at tactics. Similarly slightly stubborn, he and China only realized they had to stop attacking Britain to stop CSA's solo when it was already too late. Turkey was good at tactics but virtually silent when it came to diplomacy. Friendly, however, and very easy to work with. Prussia was friendly and rather good at tactics, although a bit of a supply center opportunist. Not incredibly talkative, but nice to work with when he did talk. Austria was not particularly communicative or good at tactics, too aggressive. Russia was similar to Austria, yet happy to stagnate for several turns and do nothing. Mexico was bad at diplomacy and tactics, too trusting and unsubtle. Brazil was a friendly player, yet similarly gullible and rather myopic. Britain noted that was not to say he hadn't acted similarly himself. USA was a dreadful player in terms of diplomacy, strategy, and tactics. Not surprising he was the first to go. Holland was not incredibly communicative, but good enough at tactics to survive for longer than he should have. Britain did suggest that was likely because of CSA, though. France was good at diplomacy and strategy, slightly less so at tactics, one of the less myopic players who foresaw the need for a coalition against CSA. Rather blunt and demanding, but Britain had several productive and interesting conversations with him. Well, this has been quite a game to review. I don't think I've put so much effort into an after-action report for a long time. Thank you to all the members of my audience for your patience and attention to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I did as much as I could with somewhat uneven reflections on the game that waned as the game went on, as you could probably tell. If you liked this video, I hope you'll feel this channel appeals to you more broadly. If it does, the best way to make sure you'll get more like it is to like and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, please feel free to check out more of my content. If you'd like to do more to support the channel, we appreciate comments, and we especially appreciate our patrons, whose names now appear on screen. We want you for the FloridaMan Army. Until next time, FloridaMan out.